Dr. Neubauer published a case in 1994, same time I was showing the UHMS abstract, and all of this work culminated eventually in the animal study that I did. As a result of the presentations at the UHMS meetings, there was a criticism that it was not believable despite chronic cases because I didn't have an animal model. So we sought an animal model, and I delivered what was the human protocol we were using back in 1990 to chronically brain injured animals. This was published in Brain Research in 2007 and essentially is the only and first demonstration of improvement of chronic brain injury in animals in the history of science. And of course, it was the human protocol we had been using for a number of years before that. But what we had done was take the rats, and we were able to show an improvement in blood vessel density and an improvement in memory function that had been lost due to the injury. Well, from March of 2008 to August, I treated a series of veterans I mentioned earlier, and the one case is in Biomed Central, BMJ Cases Journal. Subsequently made the application for the LSU pilot, and we did it. We also did SPECT brain imaging, and we tried to duplicate what Dr. Neubauer had done in 1990, the scan, dive, scan sequence, which was also the basis for the perfusion metabolism encephalopathy study from 94 to 99. So what we did was a baseline SPECT brain scan on a high-resolution scanner. Following day, one hyperbaric treatment at 1.5 atmospheres for 60 minutes, followed by a repeat SPECT brain scan that day. We then commenced to do 39 hyperbaric treatments and finished with, or 39 additional ones for a total of 40, and then finished with a repeat SPECT brain scan, repeat battery of tests you saw there, and I repeated my history and physical exam I had done at the beginning. Well, what we also did with the SPECT brain imaging, all of these years, the main change we have seen on scan is a smoothing pattern from heterogeneous brain blood flow to a more normal or smoother pattern. You'll see what I'm talking about, but this has been the basis of every presentation at every meeting I've given in the last 20 years or so. So what we did was, through the help of Dr. Fogarty, we devised a method of taking a transverse slice and taking radii along the slice and measuring counts in a region of interest. And I'll show you how we did this. Here is this heterogeneity. If you look at these two scans, one is a baseline scan and one is after a single hyperbaric treatment. On one you see kind of high-low variations. The brain color map goes from highest, yellow, white, down through orange, purple, blue, and black. In an injured brain, there is heterogeneity. Some areas injured, some not. And it registers as areas of higher flow and areas of lower flow. And so you get a lot of color variation. After a single hyperbaric treatment, the highs and lows narrow to become a more average figure, which is a normal brain blood flow pattern. And so if you look on the right, you'll see bright areas and not so bright and purple, and you'll see irregularity as you go around the brain. And look here, we have bright areas over here and here, not so bright on the other side. You get this kind of string of rosaries or rosary bead appearance to the brain blood flow. After a single hyperbaric treatment, what you see are broad bands of more constant color, and you can see it up here as well. What this is a normalization. And now, this is the histogram we did of the regions of interest. So for here, we took a region of interest in the white matter, and these are the numbers of counts in each of the bins. So you take a bin of, let's say, 20 to 25 counts, and you have so many pixels in that region of interest that have 20 to 25 counts in the pixel. And let's say this is 50 to 55 counts in that bin. You have so many pixels within that ROI that give you that number of counts. Well, here it is after a single hyperbaric treatment, and you can see what happens. The bell-shaped curve, which is rather wide and is heterogeneous, high flow, low flow, becomes more narrow. It's a steeper bell-shaped curve. And the average then becomes, I should say the deviation from average becomes a little narrower. So what we did was take a transverse slice above the level of the deep gray matter, 30, 60, 90, 120, and 150 degrees, and we measured in this little circle the number of counts. And so here, for instance, is the surface area. You can't see it so well, but it's 0.591 square centimeters, every little circle. And then we had the counts, the standard deviation, and we then took a relative standard deviation. Well, we also took 2 white matter sites. And I'll show you how this works in just a second. So, before and after 40 hyperbaric treatments, we had cognitive test questionnaires, and we had pre-post 1 and pre-post 40 hyperbaric SPECT indices. We did a student t-test and then a Wilcoxon signed rank test on some of the data. The protocol, as I told you before, we screened them in detail. I spent an hour to an hour and a half on the phone with them, screening them further, brought them to New Orleans, underwent history, physical exam, SPECT brain imaging and psychometric testing, and then treatment. We then did a 1 month, we did follow-up at the end, we did retesting at the end of the 40 treatments, and then a month and 6 months later, follow-up. And here are their symptoms. The primary symptoms that they listed, and whether they were better or unchanged after 40 treatments. So this is their report of their change after doing this for 1 month and 40 hyperbaric treatments. And you'll see that 87% reported an improvement in headache if they had headache, 75% sleep improvement, 92% memory, cognition, energy level. PTSD was the shocker. 50% of those who had PTSD claimed they had a significant improvement in their symptoms. Irritability similarly improved, mood swings, imbalance. If we get down here though, ringing in the ears, decreased hearing, and joint pains surprisingly were resistant. Now the interesting thing about this is that these are also symptoms in chronic brain decompression sickness that are very resistant to hyperbaric treatment in delayed fashion. In other words, treatment months to years later. And as you know, this has been brought up by Tom Fox, by Steve Reimers, by a variety of people now, and discussed that there may be a decompression sickness component to blast-induced brain injury. This was also interesting. 55% of the patients either stopped or decreased the amount of psychoactive medication they were on for a number of reasons. If we look at the physical exam findings, almost 90% of the abnormalities on physical exam improved. Here are the changes in the cognitive testing. Full-scale IQ went up by an average of 15 points. Now, if you look at the IQ scales and occupations, a 15-point IQ difference is the difference between a construction worker and an engineer, a clerical worker and a college professor. This is a huge change. Placebo changes seen on test-retest differences can be in the 3 to 7 point range. The key, though, is that test-retest learning effects only occur on the first retest. Every one of these veterans has had previous cognitive testing before entering this study. And let me go back here. If we look at the memory scores, 9 to 10 point memory change, huge changes, and on all of these the p-values are underneath.